This is the Trading Psychology Podcast. This is VP, creator of No Nonsense Forex and author of the book No Nonsense Forex Trading Psychology. And with me, as he is every episode, it's the man who should be president of the United States. It's Rob Reinhold.
Thank you, Patrick. And look, I don't know about should be president, but anyone who wants to be president, that sounds like the worst job of all time. Like, I have no desire to be the president of a country. It sounds terrible.
Truth be told, I don't think they do either. But welcome, everybody, to the election edition of the Trading Psychology Podcast. Now, you're going to be covered from all angles here because I did, as far as pure Forex trading goes and what you should be doing during election season or should be looking to do, I've already made a video on this. You can simply go to my YouTube channel and search for it. And I listened to that video over the weekend, and it still holds up quite well. And now you also, for fans of the channel, probably remember last Saturday, a couple days ago, we had our 10-minute contrarian election episode. So that's more what to do from an investing standpoint. And today, we're going to go over what to do from a trading psychology standpoint. So we have you covered on every single angle here. Now, this is an episode that Rob put together, and we've gone over it, and I'm excited to get into it, Rob. So one thing I want to do before you get there is, if anybody doesn't want to go watch the election episode I did on my channel, not the investing one, the trading one, the one thing I will say, if you just want the most important piece of that video, was to just simply not trade during the day before, the day of, and the day after the election. Because as we always say, if you give the big banks a reason, if you give them a green light to come in and mess with your trade, they will do that. So I would expect some pretty crazy volatility that day. And I would expect a lot of things to not go traders' way. So just for a few days, get out of the pool, enjoy your time off, watch the election, or don't, and come back towards the end of the week and see what the overall climate is in the market. You know, we might have a situation where this thing goes on a little further than we wanted it to, and that might also create chaos in the market as well. But I think probably the Thursday or Friday of this week is a good time to check back in after you've already shut everything down and see where the market is. Rob, do you have any thoughts on that before we get into the actual meat of the episode here?
I think that is very prudent advice. I've been through many elections in my 27 years, and I'm trying to think back, like I really just cannot remember the first couple. But I definitely remember the last couple. And one thing that you pretty much are always going to see is especially Tuesday night. Tuesday night, as they're starting to call states for one party or the other, you really start to see the volatility. And that volatility really grows overnight on Tuesday night and into Wednesday morning. This is all U.S. time. And then probably by Wednesday, maybe after the markets close, and maybe even into Wednesday night, everything starts to mellow out a little bit. Now look, there are some elections where there was no clear winner. I remember we were just talking, Patrick, about the hanging chads. Was that the 2000 or the 2004 election? Do you remember?
It was Bush and Gore. I don't recall exactly which one it was. I want to say, because Obama was 08, so maybe 04, yeah.
Okay. Regardless, we didn't know Florida. Florida was ended up being won by like 530 votes in the whole state of Florida. That's just amazing. So look, all of that is just going to create volatility. And volatility is good if you're a short-term trader, and if you are, into trading ranges and things like that, that's great. But for anyone who's a trend trader, I think the advice is great to just sit it out. Sit it out and wait for the markets to come back to a more reasonable kind of movement.
Yeah. So I think we're all in cahoots on that, as I think you all should be. I think a lot of you who've been here, more than 4 years, understand this as well. It's just not a time to be in the market. The only people who really would were people just being overly opportune, and those people typically don't last very long. So decide what side of the fence you want to be on. And now, Rob, I'm sure a lot of our listeners probably think that their political bias does not get in the way of their trading, or cannot get in the way of their trading. They trade the market in front of them. Very simple. It's what we always say. But you have some evidence to the contrary here, and I would like to hear about it.
Well, thanks, Patrick. I'm going to give you evidence from outside sources. This has been studied. This has actually been studied very deeply in the psychological community with lots of studies on how people have these biases, these perspectives. I have seen it firsthand at Maverick Trading and Maverick Currencies, where I have had to like reach out to traders and be like, hey, what are you doing? Like, you're only going short. Like, why are you only going short? And they would tell me, well, I don't like the way the country's going and I don't like the election results. And it's like, no, look, you have to be able to compartmentalize these things, or else it's really going to cause some havoc in your trading. Like I said, I've seen them hardly take any longs, and the longs they took, they had no patience on them, but yet they were taking shorts in a rising market with all the patience in the world, and that was very different from how they traded before. So I really want to start off with a sports analogy, because I feel like this is a really good segue into thinking about how our political bias will affect us as well, because it's pretty much the same dynamic as a sports fan. Now, many of you don't know this, but the word fan is short for something else. Patrick, do you know what it is?
Fanatic.
Yep, fanatic. So a sports fanatic. So when we talk about the word fanatic, it just means that someone who is all in, someone who is very engaged with it. So the more engaged you are with the sports team, the more you're going to care about the results and care about the outcome. And a lot of things really break down as far as logic goes. My mom, for her whole life, I can't remember her ever watching sports. For our whole life. And then when she turned about 75 years old, out of nowhere, she is now the biggest Yankees fan of all time. She goes to spring trainings. She never misses a game. There's like 162 games a year, and she watches all of them. She is an absolute fanatic now. And I was like, Mom, where did this come from? Like, you never cared about sports, and she doesn't know. She just fell into it. But here's the interesting thing. My mom is the sweetest, most loving, wonderful lady until you start to talk about the Houston Astros. She gets this snarl on her face. Her countenance is all, angry and dark, and she hates the Houston Astros. And it's so strange because I've never seen my mom do that before. Patrick, is there a sports team that you just hate?
Less and less so now. So I grew up in a city that was very sports centric, and so we would hate our rivals. And then once I moved away and into a place like Las Vegas, I became very Las Vegas. I only cared about the teams I was betting on, and I would bet on teams that I've grew up hating, if it was appropriate to do so. So I'm not sure what that says about me and my overall fandom. It was probably pretty suspect to begin with. But no, there are no teams out there that I hate. I understand that, it's even if you don't like the organization, it's just a group of guys out there trying to do the best they can and win a game for their city and for themselves. It doesn't matter, where they play.
How logical and how boring.
You've met me, right?
Yeah, of course. What about your favorite teams? So there's not any team out there that you hate, but do you have a favorite team?
Well, of course, I do. And I don't dox where I grew up or anything like that. But for sure. And it's the teams, I always liked growing up. And then became kind of a low-key fan of the UNLV Running Rebels when I went, their football team when I went to Vegas. And they were terrible the entire time. So it was great. It was like being a Cleveland Browns fan. Like, you have no expectations going in. You just you can never get let down if you have no expectations. So now that they're actually good for the first time ever, I'm not sure what to do. But yes, I have the teams I grew up with and had great memories of, with my father at the games. And then as far as college football goes, I have to pick a team, and so that was always my team.
That is very interesting because I played football, I played rugby, I played sports growing up. I was huge into sports. But I never loved a team. I just never loved a team. And I ended up choosing the Buffalo Bills, which, like the UNLV Rebels, were terrible. And now that they're actually pretty good, I don't know how I feel about it, because what happens is when you identify with this team, and all of a sudden this team, you start to get more and more into it, you start to lose a little bit of reality. You start to lose a little bit of just logic and reason looking at them. And you start to look at games that they lost and you say, oh my gosh, bad refs. The refs blew that game for them. And, the other team was cheating. And all of a sudden, you're no longer unbiased. You have now looked at it as, and I loved it when people say, we won this game with good defense. Now, these people that said that, they were never on the field. They didn't do anything. They don't know any of the players, but we did it. We played well. And when you start to identify with this sports team, again, you just have logic holes and you have things that are going to get by you because you really like the team.
I think that was a great tie-in, identifying with a particular team. And I think I know where you're going with this, because don't we also identify with political ideology now? And social media has done nothing but exacerbate this 50 times over. Because now it's not just your group of friends that identify you with the team you like or with the ideology you like. Now it's everybody. And so now this has become a really big part of you. So two things really, and none of them are good, I don't think. One, now you're never going to be able to think objectively anymore, because God forbid everybody should know you as one thing, and now you're starting to switch teams. That's going to be a PR nightmare you're just not ready for. Two, it just really hardens your ideologies, and it probably does it too early in your life. Like I can understand if you're 70 years old and you've lived life, and and you want to vote for certain things because they affect you and screw everybody else. You've done your time. You deserve it. I get that. All right. But before that, you should be a little more objective and try to understand what's going on and try to understand what would affect the greatest amount of people. Because in my mind, a rising tide lifts all boats. But you can't do that if you're tying your identity to something or some person or some group. It's really, really hard to do. Not only do you have no control over anything they do, and you're tying your identity to that. I can imagine what a helpless feeling that would be, right? But yeah, this is really a slippery slope to go down, and I feel like most people have already gone down it and are now stuck at the bottom. That was just my rant, Rob. You take this wherever you want. I just wanted to put that out there.
I 100% agree with everything you said. And when you take a look at, again, you at first said that, the internet, social media has really created this team environment. And I'm 50 years old, so I've gone through, a fair amount of elections. And the way the division is right now, it's really, really strong. And it's funny because you actually start to see a lot of the same behaviors that fandom does. Flags, signs, bumper stickers. Like 20 years ago, that just didn't exist. It just didn't exist. So it's gotten stronger. It's gotten more. And so we just have to be understanding of it in ourselves. As long as we can see it in ourselves and admit to it, oh, I'm biased on this. Then remember, this goes back to episode 1 of the Trading Psychology podcast. Identifying your weaknesses and then figuring out how are you going to trade successfully in spite of those weaknesses. This is one of those weaknesses. So how strongly you identify with a political party will make it a bigger issue for you in your trading. It's one of the reasons I've always wanted to stay independent. I've always just wanted to be in the middle and independent. And look, I know that's a chicken shit way to live life sometimes, but I understand that once I get too far one way, I've made some choices that I can never back away from. And I want to have choices. I saw this in 2016 to 2017. When Donald Trump won the White House in 2016, I had traders that went from being really good traders to being really bad traders. What I meant by that was that they were scared, they were pessimistic, they were doing way too much shorting. And when I talked to them, they're like, hey, I don't like the way the economy is going. And I'm like, what are you talking about the way the economy is going? Look at the economy. The numbers are great. but they didn't feel great. And then in 2021, I had to have the exact same conversations, but just with the other team. And there's actually a great economic study that was done it was, I think, in the spring of 2021. They went out and they interviewed Republicans and Democrats. And they said, okay, what is your opinion on the economy? And it was something like 70% of Republicans had a favorable view of the economy. And when they asked Democrats had about a 30% favorable view of the economy. So just think about this. This was a good economy. Yes, we had COVID, but the economy really bounced back after that. Inflation came with it, but when you take a look at the numbers, the economy was really good in November of 2020. 2 months later, they surveyed the same group of people after the election was over and after Joe Biden became president. It was the exact opposite. 70% of Democrats felt like the economy was great, and only 25-30% of Republicans thought that the economy was great. If you look at economic numbers throughout those 2 months, nothing changed. Not one objective measure of the economy strengthened or weakened from its trend. But people's perceptions wildly changed. And there's really only one thing that changed, was the political party in charge. Does that surprise you at all, Patrick?
It really doesn't, and I don't even like that question. I'm going to be like the nerdy actually guy here. The economy and the markets are two different things, but I don't think most people realize that. So it would be fair to say one thing or the other. And and I think a lot of people just tie it to how they're doing. There's plenty of people who eat shit in a good economy, and there's plenty of people who prosper in a bad economy. So it's a personal question too, but I know what you're saying. Yeah, the biases really do play a part in that survey. Now, I guess the way to really tie this into Forex trading, this is the Forex Trading Psychology podcast. That's the Trading Psychology podcast, but most of you are Forex traders, so let's try to correlate this here. But taking the numbers to that survey and the evidence Rob just gave with his own traders, what issues do you see popping up in their actual trading because of these biases? Is it similar to what you talked about before with that guy who kept going short, or is it deeper than that? What are some of the second and third order effects from this bias that you've been able to see, with this subsect of traders that have a really hard time adjusting?
That's a great question, and I definitely have a couple things that I saw personally. Number one was the long-short ratio. The long-short ratio was probably the clearest thing I saw. I saw people that were pessimistic in 2016 all of a sudden get really optimistic in 2017. And I saw people that were optimistic in 2016 get pessimistic. And what I mean by that is that they were mostly making bearish trades, or stuff like gold. Gold's a great barometer for how people are feeling about the currency and stuff like that. A lot of people who had never traded gold before all of a sudden started trading gold, because of just that perception that, okay, things aren't going the way I want them to go, and I think they're going to get worse. So I start to make different trades because of my personal feelings about the economy and about where the country is going. Now, all of that is subjective. The whole point is to use objective measures in your trading and in your investing, but most in your trading. We want to be 100% objective. The numbers are the numbers. And so the charts are the charts, the trends are the trends, and that's really how you have to look at it. The other one was I saw people be getting more reckless if your political party was the one who won, because again, they were feeling exuberant. They're like, hey, the big party's on, I'm going to go. And some people became very risk averse where I'm going to trade half the size I used to because I don't like how things are going here. So it really was funny, because it was the people that their party won started trading more, they started trading larger, and they started becoming a little bit reckless. The party who lost, they started trading more short, they started trading less size and they started to exhibit signs of under trading to where they found ways not to trade. That's what's going to happen. And here's the crazy thing. I know I'm going to have the same conversations in about a month from now. We prepare our traders, we talk about this with our traders, but in the end, we're all human. And I know I'm going to have these conversations. But for those of you who can see this in advance, there's a lot of things you can do to help it out.
And I want to point this out too. These are professional prop traders we're talking about. So if you are somebody who isn't quite there yet, and you think that these people are all super disciplined and know exactly what to do, and that's why they are what they are, even they have the tendency to fall apart here. So this could be just about anybody if the people at the very high levels are falling for this as well.
And let me jump in and just say that this is really an issue with my discretionary traders. Everyone runs different systems at Maverick. Some people are purely programmatic. Everything is done on a program. This affects them very little at all. The people that are more discretionary, this is going to affect them more. So I really want to talk to each one of you individually and talk about if your trading has some discretion in it, you are much more likely to fall into these traps than someone who is purely programmatic.
Well, here's where I want to come in too, because I think that even though, most of my traders are, I guess, they're discretionary, but they're also, they follow a very specific system that tells them when to go. So you would think that you wouldn't have these issues like somebody who doesn't run a system like that. However, I still think it happens. And here's my case for that, right? So you've kind of tackled the emotional side of it, right? So even if you go the logical side, this is something I covered in my podcast episode, my investing podcast a couple days ago. It is known because we've seen it before, and we know his archetype here. Donald Trump is going to want a weaker dollar, and we've seen before that even without support from Congress, he was able to make that happen, especially early on. So it would be logical to think, Rob, that if he does win, that I should mostly be looking for dollar shorts as opposed to dollar longs. Because now I want to kind of challenge you on this, Rob. I want to get your answer here, because I think there is a little bit of logical sense here, even though I don't think it's right. I do see the point. If you look at what's been going on the last 10 years in Japan, was it probably not in your best interest to go long only on the dollar yen? Don't you think your bottom line would have probably been better served? And if we're going to have Trump here again, who is really interested in killing the dollar, so trade can go up and so the economy can continue to go up, wouldn't just my non-emotional side, I just want to make money and make the right kind of trades and make the right decisions, that side of me, am I wrong to have this particular type of bias? Because on paper it seems to make sense.
I love that question, and this is going to go way deeper than you expected on this. Whenever we make a trade, whatever trade we make, we are making it with, I call it a premise. What a premise is like a hypotenuse. No, sorry. Yeah, not a hypotenuse. It's a hypothesis where we're looking at the data and we're saying, okay, based on this data, based on everything I can see out there, I believe that this is the most likely thing to happen. Every trade starts with a premise. You have to have a premise of why this is going to happen for you just to build your thoughts and shape an actual trade with entries, with exits, with all this. It's all based on a premise. So all those things you talked about, it's simply another input into your premise. Here's the problem I see is that a lot of times people will take these political biases or ideas of what should happen, and they ignore the actual trends and the actual price action. So at Maverick, we always say, look, every single trade starts with a premise. You basically are going to list out all the reasons why you think this trade is going to go in your favor. Then you're going to plan out, what am I going to do if it goes against me? And then you plan out, what am I going to do if it goes for me? That's the premise you build. So as long as you follow your stops, your targets, and all that stuff, and you follow your plan, it's great, because guess what? Sometimes your premise is just wrong. So everything you just said, Patrick, so let's say Donald Trump wins. Let's say he, puts the tariffs in place, which is really going to hurt our dollar. And let's say the dollar, some reason, doesn't go down. You can't supersede the price action because of your bias. So that's the only thing I see wrong. It's an absolute input into your trade, but everything else has to be there. And guess what? If you're wrong, you took your small loss and you move on to the next one. You clear the slate and you do a new premise. So that's exactly, we do every trade along these lines. We take in inputs, we build our trades, we plan when we're wrong, we plan when we're right, and we just keep going and going and going.
And that was a great answer. The big counterexample, at least in the Forex world, is the dollar yen. And that was a situation that was just absolutely terminal. And no matter what happened, it just never went their way. Even when the Bank of Japan stepped in and said, okay, enough, it's over. It made a bunch of news, but over time, the trend just kept going upward for the dollar yen. And we had a good 4 or 5 years to see that before we really said, okay, this is just kind of how it is. With this 4-year election cycle, you're not really going to get the chance to see that. And like you said, Rob, a lot can happen in the meantime. What the president wants is just what the president wants. Just because he got his way for a good year, back in 2018, does not mean we're going to see a repeat of that. So even though X does typically equal Y in these situations, it's not the only equation on the board. There are other factors at play too, and other really strong factors as well. The Federal Reserve, for example, what goes on in China, for example. There's a lot of different factors at play here. So you can't just sit there and say, if this candidate wins, I'm going to be looking to take these types of trades and these types of trades only, because I feel like that's going to give me an advantage. You might be rewarded, but you also might not. And I would really hate to see external factors like this get in the way of what should be a pretty good and efficient trading system.
You are exactly right. And that's what it really comes down to, is that, are you acting in objective ways? Are you following the data? Are you following the trends? Are you following your indicators? And yes, you can absolutely mix in some of this fundamental analysis. I think we talk about it all the time at Maverick of, hey, this is why we think that X is going to happen. That's just trading. That is trading in a nutshell. But what we do have to recognize is that a lot of these subjective things in our bias are going to get into our trading. And that's what a lot of our episodes have been about, is about these biases creeping into our trading. So to really try to guard against this in this economic cycle, or this election cycle and the next election cycles, I want you to tell yourself that your biggest political allegiance is to yourself and your trading. I saw an interview on Chat with Traders, and the trader, he was great. He said, my only bias is trying to be on the right side. I love that. And I think if you can get your mind and your world of trading to where your greatest allegiance is not to what's happening with Republicans, Democrats, independents, your biggest allegiance is doing the best job you can of following your system, then you're going to win. It's going to be compartmentalizing your political bias, because you can still be a very strong Republican. You can still be a very strong Democrat. And you can still take a trade. Like one of the stocks I've been trading lately, and it's only because I want to prove that I am non-biased, is I've been trading DJT. I've been trading DJT long and short. And I've been doing it just to show it's a great mover in the first place. But I want to show that, hey, I can do both. Regardless of my political biases, you can do both. If it's going up, I'm going to go long. If it's going short, if it's going down, I'll be short. That's where you want to get to where it just doesn't matter. Your allegiance is to being on the right side.
And can you explain to everybody what DJT is and what it contains?
It is a Trump Media stock. So Trump Media owns True Social, and it is a very volatile stock. It is Yeah, it's crazy. Go take a look at the chart.
But this really ties back to what I was saying about sports, too. It's funny how the older I got and the more I separated myself from being identified with certain teams, what really mattered to me at the end of the day is which team made me money. And that's really, I think, a pretty good tie-in to this entire episode, as kind of crude and rudimentary as it is my biggest allegiance at the end of the day was to myself and the money I was making. Just like you said, with your biggest allegiance to be to yourself and your trading. Anything else we should wrap it up with here, Rob?
No, I think if you just remember that, and if you need to, when I was a young trader, I got a label maker and I put labels all over my computer monitor. The computer monitors don't have as much of a margin anymore as they used to, so I don't have any labels on mine anymore. But the old big monitors, you had a lot of room. I would say print out something like, your biggest allegiance is to yourself and your trading. Just keep that in your mind, and I think it would do just fine.
Because look, at the end of the day, and I will edit this out if you don't want it in, Rob, but you guys probably don't know this. Those who listen to my investing podcast, you know what side of the fence I'm on politically. Rob is on the opposite side. Rob and I are on two very opposite sides of the political fence. And so normally in real life, if you would see two people on different sides, you would see them disagreeing on a lot of things. And maybe Rob and I do about, things in everyday life. But isn't it funny how for 76, 77 episodes now, we tend to vehemently agree on almost all the same things at the end of the day. Isn't that funny, Rob?
It is funny, and I actually think I feel the same way about my team in politics that I feel about my team in football. I haven't picked great teams, not because I loved them. So there's really no strong allegiance to it. So I'm on a certain team at the moment, but gosh, I want to get out of the team so bad and just back to the middle.
Yeah, but like I said, at the end of the day, our biggest allegiance is to ourselves and our families and our bottom line and our trading and our overall well-being, and we all agree on the same things. That should tell you something. So thank you for joining us here on another episode of the Trading Psychology Podcast. Rob and I will see you next time.
Goodbye, everybody. Go vote.